Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Monday, August 10th, 2026, episode 569, and we're going to talk about the socialist need for straw men. But before we do, let's talk about Trump contemplating declaring victory and just walking away from this Iran war. One way of doing it is basically saying, hey, we won and the ceasefire is now permanent. Given how tenuous and fake ceasefires were in the past, that is to say, Trump declares a ceasefire so they can rearm and then reattack Iran. So, given that track record, I don't know. It seems a little bit uh, uncertain, even though he's saying that. Um, so I don't know. It'd be nice if we just ended everything, and then the U.S. would have to admit that it is not the country that it used to be 50 years ago. Okay, so a former student of mine teaches in the inner city. He's African American, and I often think of him, and it's because of him that I occasionally will post sort of explanations of what capitalism is, especially in relation to socialism. And so I basically said that Trump is not a capitalist, but, socialists need to say that he is so that they can continue to push their own ideology. In other words, Trump is a socialist, and the last thing that socialists or communists want people to think is that Trump is a socialist or to know that he's a socialist, because then how are they going to, put forth their own ideology, their own platform, when it's pretty much the same? So, my student who is a Marxist, a fanatical Marxist, he saw that post and he just wrote a LOL on it, like, man, that's so not even true, right? And so he, like many socialists, they need to present a caricature or a distortion of the concepts that they want to take down. And that makes it really easy for them to do so. And capitalism would be one. And how awesome Trump is to be a self-declared capitalist when he's not. And so all the socialists can just simply say, oh, see, he says he's a capitalist, so therefore he is one, and we are opposed to that. And when you have so many people who hate Trump to begin with, I mean, I can't stand the dude. I only tolerated him when he was pro-peace, but otherwise, I mean, I cannot listen to him. Okay. So when you have so much negative vibe with regard to Trump, it's so easy for them to just sort of slip in there and say, Trump represents capitalism and that's what we oppose. And so a lot of people who don't like Trump in the first place, they're like, oh yeah, capitalism is disgusting. It's just like Trump. And so what's the opposite? What's the alternative? And that would be socialism. So socialists highlight aspects of their perception of capitalism so that they can criticize it and then offer up their own ideologies as a solution. And it's funny to me because what they're pointing at is the result of earlier socialistic policies. And now they're going to say, but we're going to fix it with more socialism. Yet there is no way that will ever work, but people aren't thinking that deeply. People are not thinking that hard. They trust their sources, they trust their teachers, and he is a teacher who gets invited to speak in all these conferences. And so clearly he's respected. I could see a lot of inner city kids looking up to him and then just basically embracing everything that he teaches. So it's a neat trick, uh, and it works if you don't really know a whole lot. But the common uh, behavior activity that you see socialists engage in is blaming capitalism for their own failures so that they can magnify uh, these failures into something even bigger. And so, in the process of creating a straw man argument that is portraying capitalism in a way which is kind of fictitious, right? So they present a caricature of capitalism, which is a distortion. It's not even really true, but it becomes an easy target. So that becomes the straw man argument. So this is capitalism, something really horrible and weak. And so this is why it is bad, right? And so that's the straw man argument. One example would be to point at corporate greed. Look at those greedy corporations, blah, blah, blah. But corporations exist primarily because of socialism. Laws and regulations in that have been passed in the past have led to these global corporations. And so right. And so for socialists to look at them and say, oh, those greedy corporations, is basically to say those greedy socialists, okay? And that's what is so comical to me. But most people don't see it because they trust and believe the straw man argument. At the same time that people buy into the straw man argument, they're also buying into the steel man argument. The steel man argument is the opposite of straw man. So instead of being a very weak argument, you make it a very hard, almost undefeatable uh, argument. And usually people say use steel man argument for the opposition, right? So you're going to make a steel man argument, and how would you take it down? But what they're doing is, on the one hand, they create a straw man argument and fight it with a steel man argument. So they portray themselves as a steel man fighting against straw man. But again, the steel man is a caricature as well. So, for example, let's feed the poor, and we can do it by just simply taking everyone's stuff and redistributing it to everybody, especially to the poor, right? And so would be an example of their steel man argument. It's fictitious, it's not real, it's not even possible. In order to pull it off, you have to ignore all of the coercion that is required. Coercion includes oppression, uh, the very thing that they're supposedly are fighting against. You also have to ignore all of the corruption that will arise as a result. I mean, Ukraine is a prime example of this. You flood the country with all this money, and people who are connected, people who are close to the money, well, they get dibs and they take a slice of it before they pass it on. There was that joke I shared, I guess it was early in the channel history, but it was a joke an Egyptian told me. And he said that the way the joke goes is that an American president was visiting Egypt. He was walking around, and on the way back to his hotel, he sees a homeless person outside the hotel. And so he looks at the Egyptian president and gives him $1,000 and says, "Hey, give this to the homeless guy and say that the president of the United States said God bless you." And so he looks at his assistant, gives him $500 and says, "Hey, go give it to the homeless guy and tell him the president of the United States says God bless you." He looks at his assistant, gives him $250, and so on and so forth. Okay. And eventually someone goes to the homeless guy and says, "Hey, the president of the United States said, God bless you." And so, because of all of the rampant corruption, all of the money that the United States gives to or for the cause of homelessness or for poor people or whatever activist cause you can think of, very little actually goes to addressing the actual issue. I mean, just look at the bullet trains in California. Uh, billions of dollars are spent, but nothing is ever built. And that's what I'm talking about. You have to pay off all these connected people uh, before anyone sees a penny. So you have to ignore the coercion, the corruption, and finally, you have to ignore the repeated failure, how socialism always fails, which is why Socialists always say, well, that wasn't real socialism. In contrast to that, just in case you've forgotten, real capitalism has never been tried either. However, with even just a little bit of capitalism, a little bit of human freedom, you see an immense, disproportionate amount of prosperity, even with just a little bit of freedom, right? So the opposite happens when you move in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's see. So the whole concept of socialism also is just a straw man. Uh, in other words, or it's a steel man, right? You're pretending that it's a really great ideology, but it's not really, because it's never all of the people who are in control. It's a small group of people who are in control of everybody else. And so, in a socialistic economy, socialistic country, it's not that the people dictate policy. No, no, no. There's a small elite that determine everything else. And they are the ones that are in control. Now, you want to maybe feel good about yourself and say, well, oh, they're only doing the will of the people. Yeah, I mean, you got to be really naive to be able to do something like that. But really, they are in it for the power, just just like everybody else. Yeah, it's human nature thing. And because you've already put into place a socialistic system, from there it becomes really easy for a dictator to arise, for a totalitarian regime to be in control, because you've already laid the groundwork for the system. I mean, contrast it with capitalism, which is all about the individual. In a society where the individual is emphasized, someone says, okay, I'm going to be in charge of all of society, everyone would just laugh at that person because there is no structure through which that person can then impose his will on everybody else. It just doesn't work that way. So I propose that we have a capitalism versus socialism spectrum, right? And so just like there's no real socialism ever tried, so they say, and there's never been a capitalist system that's ever been tried. So, well, let's have a spectrum, And I learned about the concept of spectrum when I was teaching in middle school. And people would tell me things like, oh, that child is on the autism spectrum. So they're a little bit autistic. And some people are really autistic, and but they're autistic. And basically, you have to go from there. All right, so capitalism, socialism spectrum. So on the extreme ends, you have the individual, and on the opposite end, you have society, the collective. So the closer you get to policies which favor and protect the individual, you're moving in the capitalist direction. And the more that you are opposed to individual autonomy, individual rights, and freedom, then you're moving closer and closer to uh, the socialist extreme. So uh, now, keeping in mind that this is actually a false spectrum, because on the socialism extreme, it's supposed to be the collective. However, we all have to keep in mind that there is a small group of elites that is actually rising to power. But to call them the individual is not not true, because it's not all individuals are guaranteed the same set of rights, but the elite are privileged and in many cases exempt from all of the laws everyone else has to follow. Just to FYI, I have a cold. My son, who was traveling through Europe, came home and he gave everyone his cold. Thank you. All right. So, just so you know, now because socialism uses the worst and most expensive methods to pretend to be about community and making everything better, right? They're pretending to do so, but the way they pretend is by using the worst and most expensive methods to try to pull it off. All right. So everything that they do is actually empowering the elite at our expense. Okay. So all of those expenses, everything that they are consuming, everything that they're spending, those costs spill out into the world, bleed out, in other words, not just in our country, but to other countries. And so foreign policy of these socialistic countries is more about colonizing other countries. So when the United States so-called liberates another country, what they're doing is subjugating that country. They're colonizing that country. They install a government that will do everything that the United States asks it to do, and as long as they do so, they remain in power. But if they get a little bit uppity and they say, oh, no, we're going to be independent now, the United States destabilizes that government and replaces it with another, right? And whatever story they tell everyone else, well, that's the story. Gaddafi is one. Saddam Hussein is another example of changing U.S. foreign policy towards a particular country, especially when they start disobeying the commands from Washington. And so this is the foreign policy. It's about colonizing other countries to maintain the perception that, yeah, they're all about these warm fuzzies, about equality and being fair for everybody else, right? So they hide the foreign policy from everyone who lives here in the United States, and they colonize and subjugate other countries in order to feed and maintain their base, their socialistic base here in the US. And so eventually war becomes necessary to protect the interests of the state. And we can see continuous, constant war by the United States because everything is starting to fall apart, right? More and more countries are pushing back and saying, hey, we don't like this. The Iran war is the latest example of this, and maybe the last. Now, this approach to life and cohabitation and getting along with others is not innovative, it is not creative. And so the socialistic country, the country that is employing socialistic methodology, gradually loses its ground to everybody else. In other words, they regress. Instead of advancing and maintaining their position in the global economy, they're regressing. And as a result, they need to bring down people who are getting ahead. This is classic socialism, right? You have to hold back the people who are actually excelling so that you can maintain your relative position uh, in the world. So you're going to impose sanctions on countries that are just getting too successful. You're going to wage war, have a regime change when the country seems to be in position of overtaking the United States or somehow being able to carve a better life for itself. You kill off the leadership and try to replace it. So that country is no longer a threat to you and your socialism. Uh, and so as the failures increase, we have constant war. And so therefore, the US economy eventually cannot sustain all of this spending, all of this military spending, all of this wasteful spending. And so they have to start printing more money to bail out companies, to bail out banks, to not only pay for all of its guns and butter welfare policies, but they have to do bailouts now. They bail out banks, they bail out entire countries, like they bailed out Japan a couple weeks ago. They bailed out Europe every once in a while. They'll bail out entire countries. And this causes inflation, right? So they're constantly printing money to pay its bills. But what that does is it brings down the value of the dollars that we have in our pocket, the dollars that we have in our savings account. And so when we go out and we try to buy food like a burrito, it's no longer like one of those cheap food alternatives. Now it's $20. So Burrito-Gate is something that happened on Twitter, X, where someone made a note and observation that burritos are $20 now. And basically, the implication is inflation. If the person didn't know why it was $20, you're supposed to say, oh, it's because of inflation. It's because the policies that the United States are pursuing is leading to a devaluation of the currency. And so, therefore, the burrito hasn't changed that much. I mean, there's probably a lot of thrifting, but the burrito essentially hasn't changed, but now it's $20. Not because the prices have risen, but because the value of the dollar that you're using to purchase it has gone down. Now, in response to this observation, a lot of rich people, rich politicians, rich corrupt politicians, they they basically totally missed the point and said, just add some more beads or cook the burrito at home and it then won't be $20, totally missing the point that it's their policies which are resulting in $20 burritos, which for the average everyday person is a hardship. If the burrito is $20, everything else is really, really expensive. And so they're getting angry. Now, this is the thing I want to insert here before I not forget, but before it happens, is that right now $20 burritos are like incredible, right? It's so expensive. But there will be a time very soon where $20 burritos will be considered cheap, right? Inflation is going to continue, and so a $20 burrito will be like, wow, I wish I could have a burrito for $20. So we're already thrifting in so many different ways as well. My family, not only are we observing the thrifting, like we went on a little trip to a local town, and my wife had packed drinks and she packed some iced tea. But when she went to the refrigerator and she was putting things in the refrigerator, she kind of noted that the iced tea she bought yesterday, the size of it compared to the iced tea that she had bought a month ago, the size difference was like a 4 ounce difference, basically. It looked that way anyway. But the bottles were visibly smaller than they were a month ago. But the price was exactly the same. And so that's thrifting, that's shrinkflation. Call it what you will, but it's in every aspect, every food that we are consuming. And so we're thrifting, we're buying and eating whatever is the cheapest. And so everyone else now talking about it, well, welcome to the party. So this is what we live in now. We live in a socialist nightmare. It's gradually overtaking us. And unfortunately, because there's so much miseducation, people are blaming capitalism for all of this, when in fact it's socialism. And the reason why people can't understand it is because of our poor socialistic or socialism controlled education, which has made people ignorant of a lot of this stuff. So, what do we do? As things are crashing all around us, what can we do? Well, one thing we could do is to buy things now, which might be in short supply in the future. Buy things that we can afford today that, we'll need in the future, but probably will be priced out for buying it in the future. One thing that I've done around the church is I've tried to repair things uh, before the price of repair becomes crazy, right? So particularly petroleum-based repairs like roofs, the parking lot. Like I gotta get estimates on repaving the driveways at the church. I can't do the whole parking lot because that'd be just way too expensive. And so basically, I've been trying to maintain the parking lot myself, fixing the patches, patching potholes, making sure the cracks are filled, spraying weed killer whenever weeds pop up in the cracks, try to make them last a little bit longer. But basically, yeah, so repair things, purchase things while you can afford them now, and which will go for maybe 20, 30 years and still hold its value. Personally, I invest and the church's money in Euro Pacific Capital Asset Management, which is Peter Schiff's company. And there's a methodology, but his approach, just fair warning, I'm not an investor, but from the way I see it, is that his is a long-term methodology. It's not a day trader mentality. So a lot of people today, when they want that fast return, that fast big return, it's a day trader mentality. You're trading stocks minute by minute, and you're trying to make profit or gains from hour to hour, right? That's your lifeblood. Well, Peter Schiff is not that at all. It's a buy and hold strategy, and so for a lot of people, that's too slow, whatever. Another person that I've been listening to a lot lately is Christopher Mullen. He shows up sometimes on, well, he's everywhere now. Vermeulen. If you look up David Lynn, he's on there quite regularly, or Sprott Money, I think. And yeah, so he's got some interest. He's a day trader. And so listening to those two perspectives and kind of figuring out what you're going to do is something gives you ideas, right? It'll give you sort of more options, I think, rather than being all in one strategy. It might be helpful to sort of diversify your strategy even. At least that's the way I'm doing it, particularly as someone who doesn't know a whole lot and doesn't have a lot of time to look into all of that. Then I just sort of have a diversified um, uh, methodology. I'll listen to different people to try to figure out what to do. But no matter who you listen to, the conclusion is basically, yeah, there's going to be a lot of volatility. So you got to hang on. You can't freak out. You can't panic. You have to remain calm when everyone else is panicking, right? So when everyone else is selling, maybe you want to buy. When everyone else is buying, maybe you want to sell, something like this. But of course, I'm not a day trader. I don't trade like that. I'm just a buy and hold kind of guy. And so from my perspective, it's just sort of like I just sit here and watch the show. But how are you going to manage the volatility? How do you manage the news? How do you plan for the future? I'm just tossing out some ideas. How you do it, what you do depends on your situation, and just do so considering everything else that's going on, especially all of the issues that I've been talking about on this podcast. All right, that's it for today. I will talk to you next time.